And this is data from the Trivandrum Heart Failure Registry. 55% of patients who were hospitalized for heart failure had diabetes. Now, if you look at the patients who were dying, a good number of them had suboptimal drugs at hospitalization compared to patients who were on good GDMT. And the same was true at the time of discharge. The mortality significantly went up in patients who were not on optimally guideline-based therapy. Now, if you look at the diabetes prevalence in all the big heart failure data right from the 1990s, the average percentage of diabetes is around 30%, or 1 in 3 patients had diabetes to start with. And if you look at the prevalence of heart failure in diabetic trials, and these are trials on diabetic drugs like the GLP drugs, the SGLT2 drugs, and the DPP-4 drugs, about a third or 30% of them approximately were again having heart failure. So we believe that diabetes and heart failure are very closely linked, and approximately anywhere between 30% of heart failure patients have diabetes, and up to 30% of diabetic patients have a mild to moderate heart failure. Now, the data from the Paradigm HF clearly showed that whether you are diabetic or whether you did not have diabetic, the hospitalization and cardiovascular death benefit was there for all. It was a little higher for the patients who were non-diabetic, but even if you're diabetic, you got away with a very good 20 to 22% reduction in hospitalization and CV death. If you look at the glycemic control, you will see that the addition of sacubitril gave you better glycemic control over a 3-year period compared to enalapril. The use of insulin also came down by almost 30% in the ARNI patients in blue compared to enalapril. And new onset use of OHAs was also much less in the ARNI group. The cardiometabolic modulation that ARNI does seems to put it very favorably with diabetic patients. And since a large percentage of heart failure have diabetes, and diabetes having heart failure, we feel ARNI is a drug which is clearly at a huge advantage in this population. Now, what about with HFpEF? We know that HFpEF is a completely different entity compared to HFrEF. We don't know enough about HFpEF, but all we know is that patients have congestive symptoms, they have elevated BNP, and they behave very similar to HFrEF in terms of morbidity and mortality. We do know that HFpEF is mainly caused because of conditions outside the heart, while HFrEF is primarily a myocardial abnormality, a pump failure with the resulting damage elsewhere. So HFpEF, we know, has been looked at in the CHARM study, the iPreserve study, the PEP-CHF, and the TOPCAT study, and most of the drugs were clearly not having a major benefit. Now, if you look at the HFpEF and HFrEF, survival curves are very, very similar. So whether you had an EF of more than 50 or an EF of less than 40, your mortality seems to be fairly similar. Now, although the ARNI trials with HFpEF have not been very robust, but what can be clearly seen is that even in the HFpEF place, the reduction in NT-proBNP, which we know is a valuable marker, is much better, almost by 23% reduction compared to valsartan alone. LA size reduction, again, is much better compared to the ARB. Your improvement in NYHA class is much better with the sacubitril at the start, as well as towards the start of the trial, and definitely towards the ending of the trial. So we can speculate that although the sacubitril versus valsartan trial, Paragon heart failure trial, was sort of equivocal, and the numbers really did not prove to be significant, we know that there was a definite trend towards decreased hospitalizations and decreased cardiovascular trend. There was a trend, although not significant. And one of the reasons that we would believe is that valsartan also, as a component of sacubitril, has a very powerful benefit in this population. So whether you are, uh, the sex differences, again, were a little more revealing in that females and patients who had a lower EF, they're the ones who actually had a better benefit with the sacubitril compared to those who had near good ejection fractions and who were males. And if you look at the EFs, the ones less than 50 are the ones which clearly had the benefit compared to the ones above 60, clearly showing that anything less than 57%, you did get a benefit with the EF. If you look at the deaths and the heart failure population also, we can clearly see that as long as the EF was less than 50, you got a real benefit of both mortality and hospitalization. But as your EF improved above 50 and went towards 60, then whether you were on an ARB or an ARNI did not matter.